museum back to life.
You know, people sit out on the front porch hoping people will come by.
Go forth and do good. It's insane. I have the most understanding wife in the world.
I treat everybody the same thing.
Oh, that's the other thing I love about Marietta. It's like a melting pot.
You are listening to Marietta Stories. Each week, veteran podcaster Bill Nowicki brings you the heartwarming, interesting, and fun stories from the people that make the community of Marietta, Georgia, a place to call home. Here's your host, Bill Nowicki.
I'm super excited to bring Don Most to the Marietta Stories podcast family. Hey, Don Most.
Hey, Bill. Nice to talk with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to talk to you. You'll know Don from Happy Days. He was back in the 70s. I love that show. Ralph Malph from Happy Days. He's coming to Marietta, and we'll talk all about that at the end of the show. But welcome to Marietta Stories podcast, Don.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I've done a little bit of research, and I noticed you grew up in New York City.
Yeah, in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I was looking through your bio, and it looked like you were on a track to become an engineer. Is this true?
Well, that was my, sort of the backup plan that my parents wanted me to have. They knew I'd pursued acting, singing, and all that. I started pursuing it seriously when I was about 13, 14, going to a studio class in Manhattan. So I would, from Brooklyn, get on the subway and go there on Saturdays, I remember. And I got involved initially with singing more than acting at the beginning. And I got picked to be part of this nightclub review that performed up in the Catskill Mountains, upstate New York, at the resort area. And they had a lot of hotels with nightclubs. I was 14, 15 years old, and I was in this nightclub act that summer playing all those hotels. But then I switched gears after that summer and enrolled in a more serious acting workshop and really focused on that. Just did a bit of a turn there. Through that workshop, the teacher introduced me to a manager, and she signed me on, and I started going out on auditions and pounding the pavement and started working. And, while I was still in high school, I was doing a lot of commercials and a little bit of some TV. There wasn't a lot of TV being done in New York then, but I did a lot of commercial work. And so my parents didn't want me to, they wanted me to still go to college and have something. They knew how perilous the acting business could be. And so felt like, okay, at least get a college degree and something that, you could fall back on. So that's why I went to Lehigh as an engineering major. My uncle was an engineer. Two uncles were engineers. My grandfather was an engineer, and I was good in math and science. So, I wasn't going to take drama because the whole idea was to have something else to fall back on. Mm-hmm. So I went into Lehigh, as an engineering major, though I transferred into the business school fairly soon because I wasn't being very serious about the studies, and I was involved in the acting. They had a dramatic club, and I was commuting into Manhattan a lot for auditions, and so I wasn't taking the classwork that seriously,
Yeah, it sounded like you undermined the whole plan there. That's
Well, I could have gotten through. I would have gotten through it, but things, destiny or whatever. After my junior year, I decided to go out to California for the summer to make some contacts, try to lay the groundwork so that in the following year after graduating, I could come out to LA where all the film and TV was being done. So I went out there for the summer, and I was able to get an agent because I'd been working in New York, and the agents recommended me to some agencies out in LA, and I got lucky that a really good agent wanted to sign me, and they sent me out on some auditions and for like guest starring roles on TV shows, and I landed a few, and pretty quickly. And then the agent said that I was supposed to go back for my senior year and he said, you've got some real momentum going, and you should really consider taking 6 months off from school and just continue what you've got going. And it was like, I didn't even have to think. It was just animal instinct. Yes, that's what that's what I'm doing. Although my parents weren't thrilled, but I said, look, after 6 months, didn't go back to school and stayed out and got another part and something right away. But then I went like 3 months with nothing, and I was like, oh my God, I made a big mistake. But right around then, that's when I got the call to go audition for a new show about the 50s. And, and I auditioned, they called me back, and I then had to read for Gary Marshall and about 10 other people. And then I got the word they wanted me to screen test and come back again. And yeah, so that's what led to me staying in California and then getting Happy Days. And we shot a pilot, but you don't know if it's going to go on the air. You're just shooting the pilot, but then it went right away as a mid-season replacement, and boom, so it was a big whirlwind for me at that point.
Did a little bit of reading, and it talked about the time in America where we were just coming out of Watergate, all that stuff, and it was just yucky time in our history, and Happy Days came along, and I think it was Gary Marshall's idea, correct?
Well, yeah, he created the show. He was the creator and executive producer, and they actually had made a version of it a year and a half prior with Ron Howard and Anson Williams as Potsy, and Marion played the mom, but it was a different dad. Harold Gould played the father, and they had, I think, a different daughter. Yeah, and there was no Fonzie, there was no Ralph, this was like a year and a half earlier, and it didn't sell. But then a year goes by, whatever, and American Graffiti comes out, and about the 50s, it's a huge hit, and Grease is out on Broadway. And then the people at ABC was like, oh, wait a minute, didn't we have a show about that in the 50s? And then they asked Gary to, create a new pilot and cast again. And so it was a whole rigmarole they went through. But yes, Gary did create the show. And you read something about, did you see an interview with Gary about that?
It was a talk show you were on with Anson, and you talked through that, and Mrs. C was on there with you, and you talked through that turbulent time in our history. And
yeah, it was a pretty turbulent time. And, so this was sort of an escape, people saw it as in a very romanticized, nostalgic way. And so it was a nice escape for a return back to a simpler time, which we all seem to like to do from time to time.
I just think it would be really cool just to hear what it was like a normal, what was it like on the set? What was it like working with those folks? Because it was all new for you, right? Oh, yeah.
It was a tremendous, wonderful experience. I was, incredibly excited to be working with some, I realized very quickly that it was a great cast that had been assembled and great people, Gary Marshall and his writing and producing staff, and then a director who was, he was a director of one of my favorite shows at the time, the Dick Van Dyke Show. He had directed, his name is Jerry Paris, and he had a great history in the business as an actor and then as a director. To be working with all these wonderful, talented people, and then we also got along, besides professionally, got along so well. It was one of those things where, it was a perfect blend of actors and personalities and everything. So I remember talking to my parents back in Brooklyn after we shot the pilot, and I'm saying, I feel really good about this. I think this could go, and I think they felt I was just being hopeful and having, it was wishful thinking. But I really think my instincts were telling me, that I could pick up on something special happening. Mm-hmm. And I could not have foreseen that it would become the number one show on television and, become one of the great successes of TV show. But I knew there was something very, something that was strong and exciting going on.
All right, I got Elizabeth Denny with me. Let's talk about Johnny Walker Realty. Since we started Marietta Stories 3 years ago, Johnny Walker Realty has grown tremendously. How's the culture changed?
My big fear in joining a company early stage was if it grew, would that change the culture? Johnny and Carrie have done an amazing job of making sure that everybody who joins Johnny Walker Realty really does follow the major tenets of the company. People who are absolutely customer focused, people who compete only with themselves, and people who understand that even though this is an absolutely high-stress job, you can still have a whole lot of fun doing it if you don't let it get to you.
You can contact Johnny and Carrie. They're at 262 Church Street. You go to johnnywalkerrealty.com or call them up at
678-626-0403.
What was it like the first time someone recognized you? Because, you had worked so hard to become famous, and then people started recognizing you on the street and stuff. What was that like?
Well, I wouldn't say I worked hard to become famous. It wasn't like, sure, in your mind, you might think that could be cool. That might be fun if it happened. For me, it was more about I loved doing it. And I wanted to be able to do it, have a career with it.
Mm-hmm.
If sometimes some people become very famous and other people are working actors that have a really good, sustained, long career, and they're not really famous, but they have a long, enduring career in that field. So that was probably more what I was setting out to do. And yeah, sure, you'd want some recognition, but as a means to an end. Like I'd want that recognition so it would perpetuate the career. That was the main goal.
Oh, I see.
But then, yes, then we did become a big hit. And then all of a sudden people did start, because back then you have to remember there was no internet, there was no cable.
Mm-hmm.
So there was 3 networks, a couple of the syndicated local channels, but there was only 3 networks. So when we were number one, we had 50 to 60 million people watching us every Tuesday night.
Wow.
A hit show today on a network is like maybe 6 million, and we had 50 to 60. So yes, I started getting recognized, and it was wild at the beginning. It was like I felt like I was transported into the Twilight Zone, because all of a sudden your life is turned into, it's surreal. Everywhere you go, people are recognizing you. And so, it was a hoot at the beginning. It was like, wow, it was kind of exciting and fun and all of that, when it's all the time, and it's not like it goes away and then you could just turn it off. Now it's your life, it's like 24/7 or whatever. And they don't teach you how to prepare for that in acting school, so it could play. You go through a lot of mind trips, and it can have all kinds of sort of psychological effects that luckily I'd been through 3 years of college, and you're a young adult, and so I had a good sort of foundation, but it's very difficult. How do you get used to that? I don't know. There's, like I said, there wasn't sort of a roadmap for that. And while people think, well, isn't it great? Well, yeah, it was fun and all that for a while, but then it could be a trap, and it could play, a real number on your psyche. I went through some periods. It was tough, and learning to deal with that and acclimating to it, and then still maintain sort of your identity and not get lost in things that could really take you down a dark hole.
Yeah, I would suspect you probably had people you could rely on and trust, but there's probably a lot you couldn't trust and you thought you could too. Yeah.
It gets tricky in that regard.
All right. Well, I know we only have a few more minutes. I want to ask you a couple of questions we got from Facebook. We have a Marietta City Facebook group.
Oh, great.
And they're excited to see you and the rest of the folks for Middletown.
Yeah.
It starts Tuesday the 18th through Sunday the 23rd of February at the Strand Theater. We got Sandy Duncan, who's Peter Pan, Didi, Conn, who you were on Happy Days with.
Yes, in the first season, or maybe in the second season of it too. Yeah, and then she went on to play Frenchy in the movie Grease after that.
Yeah, Beauty School Dropout was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And Adrian, how do you pronounce his last name?
Adrian Zmed. Yeah, and Adrian actually was in the movie Grease too. And then on TV, he was on T.J. Hooker with William Shatner.
Right.
And he and I worked together years ago in the Broadway tour of the play Grease.
Really?
And we played softball together in a league. We have a lot of history. So, yeah, it's Adrian and Didi, Conn and Sandy Duncan and myself. And it's a really, really good play called Middletown. It's a new play. Really takes you on a journey, a real roller coaster ride of emotions, but funny.
Yeah.
It's funny, but it also is kind of emotional at times. And I did the play. We did it in the last spring, and now we're just starting to go out with it again. And I'm really looking forward to doing it again. The reaction that we had the first times I did it were just great. People really responded to this piece.
Yeah, it seems like people laugh, they cry. It's about two couples that have been going out to dinner for 30 years, and I guess it's about reminiscing. And
yeah, for every Friday night for 30-something years, they've been, having dinner, and you go through. You start off when they're a little older, but then you go back and when they first meet and take them through their journey together, dealing with all the things that people do with having kids and the friendship, and then getting older, and it's done in a very unique way. And this was the design of the writer, the playwright, to make it really pure and all about the story and the words and the acting. So the four of us, it's kind of like the play Love Letters. We're reading it. It's a combination. It's a sort of a hybrid between reading it, little bit of staging and acting, and of course always getting into it as actors, diving into these characters. But they're none of the normal trappings, the bells and whistles of sets and costumes and all that. So it's very pure and really gets into the heart of the meat of these characters.
Yeah.
I was surprised at how effective that was. I didn't not quite know what to expect, but it was very surprising to me how well it worked.
It's almost like a radio show set up. It looked pretty cool.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say, because, people are in the theater with us, and so you still have that whole communal interaction that theater brings. They're watching us and we're feeling them. And so it's like I said, it's a hybrid between a play and you're being read to, it's different.
Yeah. Well, cool. Here's a couple quick questions. I'll let you go. This is from Greg Roper. Who inspired you to become an actor?
I'd say the ones that have the most. Well, Jack Nicholson was my guy. When I was 17, I saw the movie 5 Easy Pieces. That knocked me out. James Dean I loved Dean and Paul Newman, and then Dustin Hoffman. Mm-hmm. And then there were so many others, but if I had to name a few, those would be the guys that really jumped out at me. In comedy, on TV, when I was a kid, I loved watching Burns and Allen and George Burns and Gracie Allen and Abbott and Costello and W.C. Fields.
All right, next question. Let me see. Oh, you love music and you perform musical standards. This is from Wendy Winnick.
Yeah. Across
the country. What do you love about that? What do you love about performing songs in front of people?
As I mentioned earlier, I did it when I was young. When I was 9 years old, I saw the movie The Jolson Story, which was a biopic about the great Al Jolson, an entertainer who was considered the best number one entertainer, in the 20s, 30s. And they made a movie about him, which I saw. And then I got really interested in that music. And my mom she grew up in the big band era, so I listened to a lot of the albums from that. And I started listening to all the great singers who sang those standards. Especially, I loved with a jazz kind of feel to it. And, you know, I discovered Sinatra and Nat King Cole and Dean Martin and Tony Bennett. But my main man for that kind of music, believe it or not, was Bobby Darin, who could do those standards and swing the kind of jazz as good as any of them. I saw him at the Copacabana when I was 18. So that music, so I love that music. So about 6 years ago, I decided I had to go back to that because this music has become popular again. And it was not the case in the 70s and the 80s. So it was kind of difficult to try to do that music then. But it was more of a receptivity towards it now. And I said, if I'm ever going to do it, I'd better do it now. So, so I've been putting, you know, I put together a show, and I've been doing it in clubs in New York and LA and some theaters. And I have a CD out called Mostly Swinging, and on iTunes, Amazon, people could check it out. It's this great big band, and it swings. So, yeah, that's the music side.
All right, great. I'll put the link in the show notes.
Okay, great.
All right. So last question. Are you still in touch with actors from the Happy Days cast? Haven't seen it happen on TV shows for a long time. Would want to make Happy Days a reunion movie. So it's 2-part. Reunion movie for Happy Days, and you stay in touch with the actors.
Yeah, I stay in touch, especially Anson Williams, who played Potsy. He and I are very, very close. We speak several times a week and see each other all the time. I see Marion Ross sometimes. She doesn't live too far from me. And Henry and Ron is not. I don't see them as much, but we stay in touch. You know, we through email. And I did have lunch with Ron a few months ago, and I'm supposed to have lunch with Henry when I get back after doing this play. So yeah, we were like family. And a reunion, a movie. I don't know. You know, who knows? But there have been some talks about, you know, trying to reboot it as a TV thing, maybe where we are now. I mean, a little bit of discussion. So we'll see. You know, you never know. But in the meantime, I just did 2 other movies. I have one out, you know, on Amazon Prime called MBF, aka Man's Best Friend. It's a pretty heavy movie. I play a defense attorney, very different kind of role. And then I have another movie coming out after probably September called Lost Heart. So I still love the acting, and just like I'm going to be doing with Middletown, the play. And so I want to keep doing both.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. By the way, Mary Beth Metersthorpe wants to invite you and the rest of the cast to her house for family supper on Sunday. So you have an invite. So.
Well, that's very, very sweet of her. Thank you. I don't know if we'll be able to make it, but that's very sweet.
Yeah. Well, you know, your Southern hospitality. And I did want to thank you for your time. It's very sweet of you. And I want everybody to check out the Strand, Marietta, to see Middletown. And thank you so much, Don Most, for sharing your time and your story with us.
My pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
You have been listening to the Marietta Stories podcast. Contact us at bill@mariettastories.com to let us know your show ideas. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play so you don't miss an episode.